Welcome to The Green Fix. We are your fortnightly sustainability, business, and tech podcast. In each episode, we deep dive into one topic that you have probably been curious about. We are super excited for this deep dive in particular because we are bringing back one of our favorite guests, Tim Prosser. If you've been following us for a while, you might remember an episode we did back in June last year, which was called Greening Tech, How AI and Digital Are Changing the Sustainability Landscape. That was a really well-received episode for us. We received lots of great feedback. And in that episode, Tim took us on this really incredible deep dive into AI, digital sustainability, the relationship between ESG practice and the IT and tech practice. And it really resonated with a lot of you. It wasn't just with sustainability and IT professionals, but also everyday tech users who had no idea about the footprint of their digital lives. So we really wanted to bring Tim back because this space is moving so fast and there's a level of complexity to it that deserves a proper revisit, and probably will do that frequently. Tim's background is really interesting. He is a true techie at heart. He has a really impressive career in enterprise tech, and he has dedicated the last couple of years of his career very specifically to digital sustainability. And he's become one of the most important voices on this topic here in Australia. So in this episode, he breaks down why your cloud provider's sustainability data might not be what it seems, where Australia sits on the global digital sustainability maturity scale, and why the relationship between sustainability, finance, and IT is one to look out for. Something that he said in this interview, I think it would be quite easy to miss, was that we are not really designing for sustainability in the tech space at the moment. And yet, every single service, every piece of communication, even down to emergency response or even our passport systems, relies heavily on tech. So in today's episode, we do a deep focus on the must-know of digital sustainability, what's coming down the pipeline, and how organizations are measuring it today, and what the expectations look like for the future. It's one of those episodes that would be relevant whether you are in sustainability, whether you're in tech, or even you are someone who sends emails and streams Netflix, which is, I would guess, all of us. And one more thing, we actually created a two-part series from this conversation. In this first episode, it's all about digital sustainability and what corporates need to be looking out for in the year ahead. And in part two, we're going to deep dive into data centers and their environmental footprint, which is very top of mind for a lot of you, we are sure. So as always, we love hearing from you, whether it is the messages that you share on LinkedIn or the emails that you send us. So please keep them coming. We really love your feedback. We love your topic requests. And if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you listen, it really helps when you rate and when you subscribe to notifications to our podcast. So thank you and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to The Green Fix, your sustainability, business and technology podcast. I'm Dan Leverington.
And I'm Loretta Gutierrez. And today we are joined by one of the stars of season 1, Tim Prosser. We received a huge amount of thanks for Tim's deep dive on AI, digital sustainability, and the key relationship between ESG and tech. So welcome back, Tim.
Thanks, Loretta and Dan. It's great to be back and great to pick up this conversation again. And thanks for the invitation.
Oh, it's great to have you back. We'd love to get started today on a bit of an update on what you've been seeing in digital sustainability since we last spoke in June, which is right before you traveled to London Climate Action Week. What are some of the key developments in the industry since last year?
So when we last spoke about 8 months ago, as you mentioned, Loretta, I was about to embark on a bit of a study tour to the UK, mainly to connect with and learn from as many of my global peers in the digital sustainability arena. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to attend, London Climate Week, but also London Tech Week, both very large global events attracting over 50,000 delegates from across the world. And that was before I was able to travel down to a number of your previous guests on your podcast to Exeter University to attend the Global Tipping Points conference with some of the UK and the world's leading climate scientists. Distilling all of that on return to Australia, it's quite clear that the world of digital sustainability globally is maturing, driven partly by organisational strategies, net zero ambition, and partly risk compliance and regulation. This is all helping drive better awareness while helping to surface tools and best practice.
Yeah, and I remember in our last episode, you cautioned against ingesting vendor carbon reported data at face value. What should organizations challenge in 2026?
For context, Dan, I think it's worth revisiting a point I made in my last appearance on your podcast. Much of the emissions profile generated from an individual's use of technology today is out of sight and mostly out of mind. This is starting to change. Technology, as we all know, is intricately linked into every aspect of our lives, in our communication, our banking, our work and entertainment. For individuals wishing to align with a Paris 1.5 existence, 40% of your individual carbon budget is consumed by your digital exhaust, your digital existence, if you like. Just for a moment, think of all those emails, those photos, those videos, those streaming services, the online meetings, increasingly artificial intelligence, data centers, electronic devices you use every day. And it's digital emissions generated by over 5 billion people globally now connected to the internet, a staggering number. On average, they spend 7 hours a day connected to the internet or to their electronic devices. For organizations facing strategic and regulatory climate disclosures, surfacing and accounting for these emissions generated from the use of enterprise is complex. However, it is maturing fast as that understanding evolves. Much of the data used to populate IT emissions reporting today is sourced from a very diverse range of suppliers, all using different frameworks, different approaches, probably not a problem unfamiliar to those in the sustainability world. And they all have varying degrees of maturity and coverage. However, it's vitally critical for receiving organisations to undertake appropriate levels of due diligence on these contributions, buyer beware, you might say, to adequately understand the shortfalls in the data before being ingested and hard-baked into organisational baselines and transition plans. Or, I'm sorry to say, prepare yourself for some very big surprises down the track. To your specific question, some of the questions to surface with your technology suppliers may include: does the service provider's sustainability data cover all scopes 1, 2, and 3? Does it also include water use? Many don't. They exclude that. What is the age of the carbon data? Is it hourly, daily, monthly, quarterly? There's a huge variety in reporting frequencies. And the calculation period, is it based on per hour, which is ideal, that'd be fantastic, daily, weekly, monthly, or sometimes quarterly. So if you're reporting on something that's already 6 months old, your ability to do something with it today is pretty limited. Does the service provider cover all products and services you have with them, or have they only selected a few hero products, for example? Is the reporting provided at a detailed product resource or instance level? So, for example, in cloud, is it reporting in the individual component or the cloud environment that you consume, or is it more at a general account level? The geographic breakdown is also really important to understand. So, for example, is it Asia Pacific? Is it Australia? Is it Europe? Is it New South Wales? Is it Sydney? What level? And that's really important to understand because of the emissions profile from the energy, the electricity that it consumes, is really very different depending on where it is. And one thing that's really important to ask around the future maturing of all this is there an API connection for integration and automation into organizational systems? Because you don't want to be doing this in spreadsheets, believe me. I think we're already there. We realize that. And the last question I'd really like to surface is this service provider ISO 14064 verified? As listeners may know, this is a set of international standards providing a framework for organizations to quantify, monitor, report, and verify their greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tim. And I wonder, to contextualize this for our listeners, do you have some case studies or examples where you have seen a big variance between, what's been reported, and particularly reported based on those estimations versus actuals?
Absolutely. So I was very keen to connect with real life experience rather than the theory and the intention. So during my visit, I took the opportunity to make several connections with practitioners who are actually living and breathing this. London is right at the epicenter of the financial services industry, so I spent a bit of time in Canary Wharf, and other locations across the city. And this included connecting with representatives of global financial services, organisations we will all be familiar with. They're all on the high street. The UK government's Digital Sustainability Alliance, and non-profits working to help to develop support tools and surface an account for digital emissions. In the financial services sector alone, non-financial operational emissions across all scopes generated from the use of technology make up a significant percentage of emissions. And I'm talking in the 25 to 35% of all declared operational emissions, non-financial, I might add. So financial institutions, as we know, are usually driven by large, heavy regulated, secure corporate systems and relatively large employee base. So, for example, here in Australia, CommBank has 45,000 employees. I think organisations like HSBC, it's more like 250,000 globally, very large numbers. It's an organisational technology profile that is similar in scale to the insurance or the media and comms sectors. So they're both very enterprise technology heavy industries. So those are ones to really look at. So leading organisations with net zero commitments are increasingly embedding sustainability, as we know, into leadership KPIs or every aspect of their business strategy. And intuitive tech leadership teams are leaning into tech, what I call tech emission discovery. After all, you can't see what you don't measure. And that's leadership in my book. Progressive sustainability organisations are embarking on an exercise of bottom-up discovery rather than top-down based on traditionally finance-based calculations from invoicing, which is where many organisations are starting. But it covers discovery across the entire technology supply chain, covering all kinds of hardware, software, cloud services, data centres, telecom, and increasingly the noisy AI services. It's not uncommon for technology suppliers to only include Scope 1 and 2 emissions data in their reporting, buyer beware I mentioned, and in some cases only report on a limited set of products and services, as I mentioned, and quite often using market average rather than location-specific disclosures. It's also worth calling out that the disclosure of water, which we mentioned earlier, and location data is vitally important in initial discovery.
And outside financial services, Tim, you mentioned insurance and media. Why are those industries more likely to be exposed to undercounting of their digital footprint?
Undercounting is a broad issue across all industries, but I think in relation to their intensive use of enterprise technologies, it just means that elevates the number. By contrast, if you look at high polluting industries in resources or energy, for example, they have much bigger problems elsewhere on their emissions profile, and technology is just a tiny part of their overall profile. But organizations in the three that I mentioned, and this draws on research from McKinsey from a couple of years ago that we can include in the show notes for your listeners, highlights these three industries where technology makes up a significant contribution of that overall profile. Again, communications, media and services, just think of all that video streaming particularly, the broadcasters, Netflix, banking and investment services. IT, technology uses IT in order to secure your money in a highly regulated environment, and that tends to require an awful lot of technology. Insurance, there are many, many different products in insurance. Think of car, think of individual, house, personal insurance, and there's very little crossover. They operate in silos, so there's technology stacks by particular insurance types. So there's a challenge around efficiency across insurance in that respect. So that's probably why there's a significant build out of technology to support those silos.
Yeah, that's a really interesting call out for any individuals that are working in these industries and they may have not considered the footprint of their IT infrastructure. On that, I also want to double click on something you mentioned earlier, which is saying that spreadsheets are no longer tolerable, and this is particularly at audit level. What would you say that practitioners should be moving towards to ensure that, high provenance, credible reporting to be put in place?
As you rightly point out, Loretto, we're rapidly moving towards sustainability practices that demand trustworthy, traceable, and auditable insights at scale. This requires organizations to treat sustainability data with many of the same controls as financial data is treated today. That might alarm some people, but that's where we need to be, and that's where we're heading for sure. In practical terms, this requires close collaboration with peers in finance, sustainability, and IT, or as we're beginning to start to call the sustainability value triangle in organizations. It's a relationship based on established trust with foundation built on high quality, high integrity data. The move from static reports to auditable, governed reporting involves immutable records and audit trails that require automated, schedule-driven reporting, where methods are documented and access is strictly controlled on the job role. Many of those facets are very familiar to those that worked in heavily regulated industries. I've worked in aerospace, financial services, energy, for example, and I can see evidence of that in traditional business enterprise systems.
One of the things that you saw when you're in the UK was this emissions true-ups. How are you seeing Australian organisations currently being exposed to greenwashing litigation for their existing digital claims?
This is certainly an issue on the minds of Australian boards at the highest levels of Australian business, if not specifically yet in the IT department. That time will come, though, I have absolutely no doubt, probably within the next 2 or 3 years, if I reckon. As listeners will be aware, the Australian Corporate Consumer Regulator has been very active in the last 3 years, calling out over 47 organisations for misleading consumers on product or services in greenwashing claims, several cases resulting in multi-million-dollar High Court penalty settlements. The regulator has also made it very, very clear in a number of events I've attended where I've heard them publicly speak that they expect full compliance with new mandatory climate disclosures by the 8,000 or so Australian businesses required to report with a 3-year moratorium on broader stakeholder litigation. However, that doesn't really mean that they've got 3 years to get ready for this. There are already very active, noteworthy cases in the last couple of years. An increasing number of litigation cases are coming from community groups, which in turn is driving corporate behaviour, or in some cases a bit of paranoia. Rightly so, I might add. Examples include last year's Parents for Climate v Energy Australia case, which has since moved into the broader energy sector in Australia, around 100% green energy claims. And internationally last year, the Vanuatu students in the ICJ ruling, and back to Australia, Climate Integrity's ACCC referral relating quantities carbon flight offset program, which is still before the regulator. Specifically relating to IT or sustainable IT, the Australian government announced environmentally sustainable procurement policies in July last year, which not many people are aware of, aimed at all ICT purchases over $1 million. This includes all Australian public service entities and suppliers and includes environmental claims made suppliers. So what we're starting to see is it's starting to fall into the IT industry, possibly with unsuspecting IT practitioners unaware this is coming because if they're not involved in sustainability, they wouldn't see it.
Tim, I want to kind of pivot the conversation to a few articles that you've written last year and this year. One was the 2026 Australian Cloud Reality Check, and the IT sustainability maturity assessment that I'd love to talk about. Maybe we'll start with the maturity assessment. I'd love for our listeners to hear what's that all about? Where would you say that most Australian corporations are sitting in that maturity scale for people, process, and technology?
But before I go on and answer that question, I just want to give a call out to Dan for inspiring me to write those blogs. I've written 25 in the last 6 months, and Dan kind of inspired me to trigger that. So, yeah, it's a really good excuse to go deep on a certain topic and teach yourself and document it in the process. So thanks, Dan.
Definitely. It is no small feat to be able to write that many pieces in a very short period of time. It's been phenomenal to see what you've been able to do with it.
So back on the IT sustainability maturity assessment. So this was created by a global nonprofit called Sustainable IT, and it's a global community of sustainable IT practitioners, as the name suggests. The maturity assessment, now in its second year, is a free global assessment to help organisations understand where they sit today on their IT sustainability journey, and then benchmark themselves against a specific region or industry to understand what the neighbours are doing. The tool itself then helps participants establish a goal for where they aspire to be in 2 or 3 years' time. As you mentioned in the question, the assessment covers 45 questions across 3 broad dimensions of people, process, and technology. Under people, you're looking at things like awareness and commitment of your staff, the IT strategy and how it aligns with sustainability, ambition, or goals, and the resources you have access to and people to support that journey. Under process, you're looking for things like data processes and tools, the governance, the performance measurement, the change management in the transition of the organization in that journey. The training and culture, are you bringing people along and giving them the tools and the knowledge to actually execute, and the procurement processes that need to be changed and adopted Then more specifically in technology, you're looking at the enterprise architecture, how you're designing the future of the organization, all the tools and the supports to execute your business. But you're looking at infrastructure management, which includes security and governance of that. These are all terms that are very familiar to the IT community, and we're now looking at them from a sustainability lens. So this is a relatively straightforward 5-minute questionnaire assessment to do. Multiple choice, no block text. You get the opportunity to score yourself or your future state in one of 5 ratings. So are you at the beginning level? So i.e. there's no governance for sustainability initiatives, very basic. It's unstructured, so there's limited governance for sustainability. Everyone's kind of doing all kinds of stuff, but it's not really organized and structured. Defined, so that's kind of a level 3, where it's clearly defined responsibility and accountability, but there's still quite a lot of room for improvement. Managed, where there's continuous monitoring of progress and a repeat improvement around that. And optimize, the ultimate end goal, where sustainability is embedded in enterprise and governance and well understood and executed. Sounds like utopia, that last one, but that's certainly where we're heading. Last time the global assessment was completed in 2024, the organizational mean globally revealed an unstructured current state with an ambition to be managed. Reminder, structured is limited governance for sustainability. That will come as no surprise to listeners on this, with a kind of a global ambition wanting to be managed. So essentially currently a level 2 wanting to be level 4. Notably not optimized, which was interesting. Optimized comes with a lot of cost and a lot of potentially overhead, and that seemed to be a little bit ambitious for this community. Of interest, the highest rating individual scores were awareness and commitment among people, staff, which is interesting. Technology architectures requiring the most improvement. So we're not really designing for sustainability in the future organization, which is definitely a call out for improvement. The 2025 assessment remains open, so we can certainly include a link in the show notes of the podcast, and listeners, for those interested in learning more, certainly encourage you to jump on and give it a go.
Yeah, I think that would be a very interesting exercise to do, and maybe a nice bridge for sustainability folk to start engaging with their tech peers. Building on that, some recent research classified all Australian cloud environments with either an E or an F rating. What specific factors are you seeing as dragging our local cloud efficiency so far behind the global A-rated standard?
So just a caveat to start with, I'll be more specific and drill down on the all cloud environments. This really focuses on the main hyperscalers from Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, and Google Cloud, those 3 specifically. Simply put, Australia's power grid today still relies on fossil fuels, coal and gas. Build out of additional renewable power generation remains on the critical path to decarbonise our grid, but remains very behind schedule to meet our 2030 targets, which is now less than 48 months away. Major hyperscaler cloud environments hosted in Australia operate predominantly out of Melbourne, Canberra and Sydney, all of which source their power from the National Electricity Market, or as we refer it, the NEM. Emissions generated by hosting workloads in a dirty F-rated cloud environment can be as much as 99% higher in CO2 emissions than a green hosting region. And we're comparing ourselves to Scandinavia, parts of Europe, Canada, those kind of examples. Unfortunately for Australia and much of the Asia Pacific, most cloud environments are hosted in E or F rated regions, which doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room for sustainability focused organizations. The exception, however, is New Zealand, which is rated B, which benefits from a very low carbon energy grid where power is sourced from a combination of hydro, geothermal, and wind. Many of these cloud environments underpin Australia's national digital infrastructure, supporting services, as we mentioned earlier, every time we pick up a device to send a message, join a video call, run an internet search, purchase goods, pay a bill online. All these systems relied on by government and business to provide services such as banking, communications, emergency response. Even Australia's passport, tax and welfare systems are all based on these platforms.
And Tim, do you think there's any realistic pathways for Australian regions to replicate that success of, that B-rated cloud in New Zealand? We know that one of the Azure data centers was rated with a B. Is there a realistic pathway for Australian regions to replicate this?
I'm going to be quite blunt and say this remains a significant challenge for Australia. Our largest coal-fired power station in New South Wales got extended for another 2 years, which is an indication of how challenging this is. That provides between 20 and 25% of the state's power in New South Wales. Today, the best states for renewable energy grid, Tasmania, South Australia, where last year 95 and 84% of electricity generation respectively came from renewable sources. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT, where much of Australia's cloud workload is hosted today. It will be several years before Australia's cloud environments inch up the scale from their ERF ratings, and more than a decade, I believe, before they appear anywhere close to New Zealand's current position. Much of the challenge for green IT centres around a two-speed, kind of what I call renewable economy, one being demand, the other being supply. The renewable energy build-out of supply in Australia is complex, heavily regulated and reliant on government intervention over many, many years, while on the demand side, technology customers, including cloud hyperscalers, data centers, and increasingly AI platforms, are moving fast with very short-term horizons, sometimes as little as 2 or 3 years from turning a sod of soil to having a building erected and operational. As an illustration for listeners, generation of 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in the 12 months of 2025 had a carbon intensity of 41 grams of CO2 in New Zealand, 56 grams in Tasmania, 156 grams in South Australia, and get this, 464 grams in Victoria. And the prize goes to New South Wales and ACT, 481 grams of CO2 per unit of electricity. Now, that's a massive difference, and we need to draw some attention to organisations and practitioners to make sure they have agency choice around where they're placing their workloads, because essentially they're going to have to invest in offsets if they're going to meet their carbon budget objectives. And interestingly, research modelling late last year by the Australian Federal Government's Clean Energy Finance Corporation found that new electrical demand from data centres would result in the tightening of the electricity supply and could lead to significant wholesale power price increases, specifically plus 26% in New South Wales and plus 23% in Victoria by 2035. Crucially, this unmanaged load growth would require greater reliance on fossil fuel generation sources in the short term, resulting in a plus 14% increase in grid emissions across the NEM. And that's equivalent to another 6 million tonnes of CO2 annually. A worrying precedent if proven out, and I think yesterday's coal-fired power station extension is evidence that that is actually happening.
Yeah. And I mean, it just brings to the fore the role that energy security and national security will continue to play for organisations operating in Australia. Speaking of, from a commercial and operational perspective, you've just laid out a very complex system in which organisations are operating within. Some they can control, some they're going to have to be a little bit patient. If that is the case, how do you see sustainability and finance partnering with IT to better collaborate in order for them to be able to turn this into a commercial value driver that they can utilize to their benefit?
So the path from compliance reporting, as we put it, or a chore, I think was the phrase you used, to commercial value really hinges on turning sustainability data into strategic insight. And ultimately, the reason we're all here, action. The sustainability triangle, as I referred to earlier, helps structure collaboration across the 3 major functions of sustainability, finance, and IT, ultimately to drive sustainable value creation in any organization. The model helps define a set of joint value objectives and governance, elevate data as a commercial asset, as we mentioned earlier, and build the business case and the funding model for sustainability, whilst integrating planning and decision-making ahead of operationalizing collaboration to day-to-day routines. Critically, it helps address the technology footprint, the responsible use of artificial intelligence, and manage the change and shift in mindset amongst employees. Of note, and this is a flag for work that's underway with a sustainable IT nonprofit at the moment, this year in 2020, we are looking to develop templates and tools in the IT business case modeling community. So that's definitely a live project as we talk.
I'd love to ask Tim, bringing back that conversation around how do we connect better with that IT function. A lot of the times, the report serves as a bit of a truth-telling exercise for the organization, and in particular for processes that haven't been looked at before. A really good example would be asset management. What would you say, from your experience working with all these organizations, are the internal IT processes that are usually the messiest when they are exposed with this sustainability lens?
I think really, Loretto, the jury is still out for that award, with several contenders vying for line honours across procurement, finance, software and hardware asset management, as you mentioned. But don't forget things like building management systems or integrated supplier billing systems. This space is evolving rapidly as solutions are built out and processes and tools are maturing. However, now is a really good time for sustainability and IT leaders to get their heads together to determine what success looks like for that on behalf of their organization, or to put it another way, what standards you as an organization are unwilling to walk past. Like, what is your minimum standard? Be very, very clear in setting your expectations demanded of your technology suppliers, and don't just ingest what they provide, because you'll be in trouble if you do that. When you can't be clear on which path they need to take, any road will ultimately not support your sustainability goals. So be clear in what you expect.
Absolutely. And we've previously spoken with you about our listener taking their CIO out for lunch in order to build that relationship out further. As the CIO's influence continues to grow on all things ESG, as well as across the entire org, what is the one technical KPI you think sustainability managers should be asking for in their next meeting?
I'm going to talk about unit economics. So understanding and tracking how much carbon-specific key business transactions generate. Now, that might sound, where's he going with this? So many organizations already map their underlying technology use to business function. This metric is purely an extension of that to add emissions. So rather than looking at money, you're just adding, a carbon budget in CO2 or tons of CO2 per transaction. Your most relevant metric will be key to driving a specific business process. So where your organization adds value to something for customers, for example, in banking, a financial transaction and mapping to the emissions generated at transaction level, for example. Ultimately, this is with an aim of breaking the link between business growth and carbon to become more emissions efficient in your business processes.
Super interesting. So, Tim, if you think about our listener and the types of organizations that they work for, what would you say is the one key takeaway that you would want them to take from this episode to prepare for changing the way they measure digital sustainability?
Find and recruit the helpers. I think that's probably my takeaway. So over 1 million people work in technology-related jobs in Australia, over 8% of the working population. I think we touched on this in the last podcast I was on. Research repeatedly shows that many of these tech workers are looking to align their role with impact, purpose, and ultimately sustainability. Extend an invitation and you may be surprised who shows up.
I love that, because if you give them the opportunity, I know for a fact that they grab it with both hands. All right, Tim, rapid fire round for you. What is a thought-provoking book, podcast, or article you would like to share with our listener?
Now, for me, this is a difficult question because I consume all kinds of stuff. Some of it I'll pass on, but I'm gonna share two books with you. So one is a hot off the press publication in its second edition, The Sustainable IT Playbook by Nicholas Sundberg and Richard Pascoe, who I've met and spoken to several times. It's a hand-on guide to designing and scaling sustainable IT strategies for the digital age. So it's really a handbook. It's predominantly aimed at IT audiences, but from a sustainability practitioner, it might be a good gift to give your CIO when you go for a coffee. And then also a recommendation that came to me over Christmas from a highly respected source, and Barack Obama is all over it as well. And for some reason, I'm late to this book, The Ministry of the Future, published in 2020 by American science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. It's a climate fiction cli-fi novel that helps future thinkers among us light up our imagination about a future world. So I needed a bit of pick-me-up fiction, I think, over the Christmas holidays. So that was my recommendation.
Next question is, who is someone that has inspired you that you think we should have on this podcast?
So many people to this question. I'm always inspired by people in sustainability and the climate worlds and the way they continue to inspire me every day and actively demonstrating resilience, resourcefulness, grit, determination, focus, and ambition. But the one specific person I would really highly recommend is that you should have a chat to is Nick Seaton, the CEO of Parents for Climate, and the driving force behind holding major corporates to account in the energy sector. I was lucky to be invited to their end of year celebration last year, and the energy in the room of the community that Nick and the team are building is, wow, it's a force to be reckoned with. So watch out 2026.
Very good. I love it. We will shoot Nick a message. What is one piece of positive climate news that you can share with us?
Hopefully it's positive, but I really, and I know you do too, Dan, look forward to January and the publication of Nat Bullard's presentation. Nat was the former Bloomberg New Energy finance analyst. It sounds horrendous, but he publishes very graphic 200 slides every year. It sounds like 200 slides. How could that be engaging? This year is quite different, I think, from my first pass review of the slides, but it's really informative. He's obviously asking questions and mulling over some interesting points around decarbonisation and climate globally. So certainly look out for that.
Awesome. I'm very excited to check out this year's.
And Tim, final question. If we gave you a magic wand to change one thing in the world, what would you do with it?
So in my appearance last time, I waved a wand for a price on carbon. Assuming that wish still stands, I want to double down this time, more specifically around carbon border adjustment mechanism maturity. That sounds very dry, but putting a price on carbon really does drive some of the business incentives away from polluting existing products and services. Several governments are quite some ways down the path of implementing various forms in Europe, China, and the UK, maybe even in Australia, or part of an APAC CBM. So we'll see.
Excellent. That is a very, very good use of the magic wand once again. Tim, thank you for coming back to join us. We love talking to you. Every conversation we have with you, we walk away having learnt something deeper and broader, and this is no exception. One of the great things about digital sustainability is moving so fast and is having to respond to so many different pressures coming at it, whether they be legacy or whether they be the future arriving in the present, even faster than we probably predicted. And so yeah, always a standing invitation to come and join us on The Green Fix whenever you see fit.
Thanks, Loretta and Dan. A pleasure.
Cheers.
This was Green Fix with your hosts, Loretta Gutierrez and Dan Levington. You can get your Green Fix every 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Pocket Casts.